Coming up on episode 140 of Anarcho Agenda, I sit down with the founder and CEO of BitChute, and we talk digital privacy. This podcast is covered by the BitChute No Government License. This allows use and reuse by anyone except governments and or government agents. Learn more at bitchute.org. In the digital age, our privacy is really important. On this episode of Anarcho Agenda, my guest, Ray Vahey, and I sit down to talk digital privacy and BitChute. First, a word from my advertiser. In this digital age, your information is everywhere on the internet, ready to be used by bad actors. From your social security number to where you live, even your bank details may be out there. It is purely the mere number of others in the same camp that has protected the majority. For nearly 2 decades, ThinkPenguin.com has been developing solutions to protect your privacy. Take back your privacy by going to ThinkPenguin.com and buying Linux-based hardware and software to get back some resemblance of your digital privacy. That's ThinkPenguin.com. This is Anarcho Agenda episode 140. I'm Riley Blake. I've got with me Ray Vahey, who is the founder and CEO of BitChute, which is a YouTube alternative. Ray, welcome to Anarcho Agenda.
Hi, Riley. Thank you for having me.
So the first question I want to start with, and maybe you can help me out here to understand your background. What is your background? How did you get into software engineering?
Yeah, so I've always been interested in computers from a very young age. Actually, I got my first computer, an 8-bit machine at 6 years old. So I've been fascinated growing up with computers. And yeah, it was the natural thing for me to go into. After leaving school, I went into various computing jobs and then went into the telecoms industry. And that was quite a good job because I got to travel around the world. I worked a bit at the time in America. I worked in Asia, a lot of that time, in China, in Thailand. Yeah, installing very large scale, highly available, highly redundant telecom systems, voicemail, things like that. So yeah, that's my history. And that led on to me working for myself and then still in IT, developing my own businesses. And eventually I got to around 2016, where I was very interested in alternative media. And in fact, YouTube at that time, I thought YouTube was a fantastic platform where anyone could go there. They could get access to information. They could for free. It was a great leveler. No matter if you were the richest person in the world or the poorest, you could get access to fantastic amounts of information. So the alternative media people who I was following at that time were starting to complain about censorship, about it creeping in. And as I was watching them, I wondered if there was something I could do about it. And that was what gave me the idea to start BitChute.
You said you were working in the telecom industry. Which large companies did you install telecom systems for?
Yeah, so I was contracting with HP, Hewlett-Packard, and I worked around the world. I worked in the UK for a while, worked in Italy for a little bit with Telecom Italia. I worked in America with Bell South for a very short time, which was in Atlanta before they got reabsorbed into AT&T. I worked in Thailand for AIS, which is the biggest telecoms company in Thailand, where I'm actually living right now. My wife's Thai. So when I hit Thailand, I decided to stay here and I found my wife. I worked in Georgia for their telephone company, Tbilisi. So both Georgias, Georgia Atlanta and Georgia the country. Panama Mobile, BVI, that was cable and wireless. China, worked for China Mobile through, not directly, but through a long sort of list of companies, Hewlett-Packard to Huawei to China Mobile. So that was quite an experience working out there as well. So I've worked in many different places around the world.
It sounds like you're well-traveled, and it sounds like you've had a lot of different cultural experiences.
Yes, I'd say that's right. Yeah. And like I say, when I came to Thailand, I actually met my wife. So I decided that this is the place I like, and I've been here for quite a while now. My kids are both half Thai, so so it's a lovely place to work and to visit.
That sounds lovely. So I hear a lot of people object to digital privacy by saying, well, I have nothing to hide, so why should I want my digital privacy? What would you say to those people?
This is an argument I hear often as well. I would say that there's a lot of problems with this argument. You should want to keep your privacy safe. There's a lot of problems that can occur from people getting access to your information. If hackers get access to it, of course, they can steal your information and do all sorts of nefarious things with it. But even large corporations selling your data is very problematic. They can sell it to companies that are able to, influence your insurance premiums, all sorts of problems. But also governments. I don't think governments should have access to any more information than the minimum that we need to give them, because there's been a lot of problems with governments in the past. For example, 1960s and 70s, you had like a whole scandal with J. Edgar Hoover, collecting information on thousands of Americans. Or more recently than that, in Canada, you had the whole 2020, in 2022, the whole trucker protest, where the governments were monitoring which people were donating to a cause that they liked, and whether you agree with the cause or not, it was their own money, and shutting down bank accounts. And there's so many examples about this around the world. In China, they've got a whole surveillance system, and if you're not doing what the Chinese government would like you to do, you could run into huge problems where you haven't got access to plane tickets or train tickets because your social credit score is too low. So that hasn't quite come to the US yet, but giving out this information freely allows these sorts of systems to be constructed. It's a prerequisite to sort of to constructing these sorts of systems. But even more than that, just knowing that you're being surveilled changes how people act. So, for example, after the Snowden revelations, there were a lot of studies done, and the studies found that people were, just knowing that they were being surveilled, behaved differently. They were searching for different things online. They weren't searching for as much medical information. They weren't searching for as much sexuality information. They weren't searching for what might be considered controversial political opinions online. So it was changing people. But even offline, people weren't attending as many rallies or signing petitions. So that's the chilling effect. And, that changes people's behavior just from this surveillance being in place. So we should always push back, in my opinion, against being surveilled. There's so many good reasons to do it. It's so important. And it's really important to maintaining a free society.
I agree with you there. I think that a lot of people forget that you may think you have nothing to hide, but you never know what you're doing in the privacy of your own home that somebody might be interested in and could ruin your political career, your main career, your life, your religious opportunities, all sorts of things. And I remember hearing about the Snowden revelations in 2013, I believe it was, and a lot of people were upset that the government was surveilling them, but also a lot of people deemed him a traitor. So, when the Patriot came online, a lot of people were like, well, I have nothing to hide. I don't want to be afraid of the government. But there were also people pushing back and saying, no, you should be afraid of the government. The government has no right to surveil you like this.
Absolutely. And, even if you trust the government today, allowing these systems to be built, to be put in place, means that a future government is likely, is I would say, guaranteed to abuse them, because it's happened time and time again. I already mentioned J. Edgar Hoover, but just to go a bit more into that, in the 1960s and 70s, he was setting up illegal spying, recruiting spies to infiltrate people, groups of anti-war protesters, or spy on people like Martin Luther King Jr. or infiltrate just ordinary Americans who had no crime other than wanting to dissent. So that was all illegal. And, Martin Luther King, J. Edgar Hoover had to recruit people and he had to plant bugs at that time. And that all came out in the church committee hearings, which shut it all down and passed laws to shut it all down. But it doesn't mean that it couldn't happen again. But that was illegal. The difference, and in some ways a bigger problem today, is that the types of surveillance that happens today is perfectly legal, because we're carrying smart devices everywhere. You've got your smartphone, you've got your smart wristband if you're at the gym, you've got your smart fridge, smart car, smart everything, which is all collecting information. Or if you're going online or going to platforms, they're all collecting information, storing it up and selling it. So governments can actually get way, way more access to information that, they couldn't walk into your house and demand that information, because they would need a warrant that they would never get under the Fourth Amendment. Instead of that, they can just buy it from private companies right now, which is a complete loophole that makes this surveillance so dangerous.
I agree with you there. I think it's a really sneaky, underhanded tactic to presume that, the American people are going to be protected from their government surveilling them when they're buying data.
Absolutely. And and like I mentioned, the trucker protests and, other governments around the world are already cracking down. And it's happening in the US as well. People have been visited by the FBI because they've looked up certain things online. It's really none of the government's business. They shouldn't be involved in our lives. I like transparency for the government. I like privacy for individuals.
I agree with you on there. I think government should definitely be transparent so we know what they're doing to us and how they're representing us.
Absolutely. 100%.
What do you think about cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, Monero, and those types of things?
Yeah, they're good. Actually, because BitChute, so a bit more about the history of BitChute. We were founded in the UK. We're now an American company. We moved to the USA last year. Back in 2017, we launched in the UK. And because of what we do, because we're such a privacy-focused and free speech-focused platform, we believe in, as long as people's views are legal, they're not breaking any laws, we believe that we should platform them, and that is the best thing for society. But many activists don't, unfortunately, and we ran into lots of problems with banking. We found that at one point we just couldn't get a bank anymore. So we actually had to run the company using crypto for more than a year, which is, I tell you, an incredibly difficult task. Just living on your own on crypto is quite difficult, but running a company for that period of time is like a very, very difficult. But we eventually pulled out and moved to the US. But so for us, it was a great lifesaver. I mean, BitChute wouldn't probably be here now if it wasn't for crypto. And we used all sorts of crypto. So we, collected just about everything Bitcoin. But Tether, actually, which is a stable coin, was especially useful for settling bills and paying people and just using in place of a bank. But I do also have words of caution, because, you've got privacy coins like Monero, you mentioned, and there's others too. But people should be aware that the way that Bitcoin works, it is a public ledger. And especially with a lot of these privacy coins, they're much more centralized than people might understand. So there is a concern there. There are potential problems. You may have heard of the pushback against central bank digital currencies.
Oh, yeah.
And so the problem, of course, with those is that gives way, way too much power to our governments. They can not only track everything we're doing with our funds, but they can program limits for us. So, if they don't want us to buy too much meat in a month or too much of anything in a month, they can just set a limit. So it's very dangerous to to give a government that much power. And in fact, one of the bankers in the Bank of England even stated that. So, they weren't even hiding that fact that they would have that much power. There is a concern now with regulation, and especially the way that stable coins are going, that a lot of the controls that would be possible through a central bank digital currency could also be possible through stable coins. And even though there's more of a free market, if they're regulated enough, as you know, then that quickly dissipates. And that's something we really need to keep a close eye on, especially with all the other information that's being gathered up about people, coupling that with a currency that the government has influence over, or in fact, anyone has influence over directly, can be a really huge problem.
I would agree with that. My big concern has been with the Genius Act that was recently passed by the Congress and the Trump administration. It seems like they want to regulate cryptocurrencies more rather than deregulate and allow for more opportunities for cryptocurrencies to flourish.
Yes, and that's exactly that is exactly what I described. That regulation will come in. It will put huge barriers to entry into the market, limit who can be the permitted stable coins. So the government can have, if they want to, as much control as they would have had over a central bank digital currency over stable coins. So that's a huge concern. And even though I think Bitcoin is a tool, and it's something that can be used for great good, we have to also be cautious about the other ways that it can be used against us.
Why do you think governments are interested so much in our data?
There's always the stated goals, right? So when they usually want to have more data, they will say it's for things like efficiency, or for stopping terrorists, or for protecting children. Those are usually the reasons that come out. But I'm highly skeptical of those reasons. I think maybe there's some part of it. There's people who believe that, but I also think that it makes it a lot easier for governments, for people in governments to have greater control over the population, to control the economy. For example, with a central bank digital currency, you couldn't have a run on banks as easy, something like that, or have problems with people spending on things that the government doesn't want them to spend on, which could be like in the 2022 trucker protests, campaigns that they don't like, perfectly legal campaigns even. And I think it is about control. I do think it is about control. And I think it ties in completely with what happened back in March of this year, when President Trump signed another executive order, which was about removing the silos from data. I don't know if you saw that one, but
I didn't
at the
see that
time,
one.
not much notice was given to it at the time. So in March of this year, President Trump signed an executive order that was about eliminating information silos. And, at first that didn't seem that interesting, but actually what it does is allow the Trump administration, or any administration, to designate Americans' most private information, most private government information, to companies that they designate it to. So, for example, that includes your IRS tax records. It includes your HHS health records. It includes Department of Education records. And the company that they've chosen is Palantir. Now, Palantir is a leader in the surveillance market, but it's not unique. There's other companies that have a lot of the tools that they've got, like Microsoft, like Google, but Palantir is the one that's been selected for this. So really, it's down to the Trump administration allowing this at all. I think that shouldn't happen, because this information wasn't collected for this reason, and it shouldn't be used in this way. Normally, it's siloed and held by individual departments. But given that Palantir has got access now to this information, they're able to use it along with all the information that they can collect from private companies. So things like there's a whole market for this. There's data brokers, companies like LexisNexis or Axiom, who collect up massive amounts of data and sell it to third parties. So that includes browsing history, app data, insurance information, magazine information. If you've got a magazine purchase, pretty much anything that you can think of where data is collectible, they've probably got it and can sell it on to third parties. And this combination of the government now having, through Palantir, access to all of this information, your private information, from your tax records, plus all of the publicly purchasable information, makes it extremely dangerous, in my opinion. They're able to create incredibly detailed profiles on everyone if they choose to. And that, it's just wrong for the government to have it. But it's very scary if it ever gets into hands that would use it for malicious reasons, because they will have these incredibly detailed profiles that they will be able to identify all of the pressure points for each individual that would allow them to, make us do whatever they want. Maybe that's not allowing us to have business loans or not allowing us to have a mortgage. And again, you may think, well, you may be someone who trusts the Trump administration. I'm not saying you are, but maybe a listener is. But the real danger here is that these systems are being built now, and once they're built, it's very difficult to deconstruct them. They'll be handed on to future administrations, and eventually it will get to an administration that will abuse this, as has happened in the past.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I'm actually not one who trusts any government administration because I consider a government mostly a gang with liars and thieves and badges to support their tyranny. So I definitely don't trust government at all. So, bringing up Palantir has made me realize that it's just the Patriot Act all over again, except it's going through private companies.
Right, and Palantir. I mean, yeah, I don't think any company should have this, but I've been looking at this in a bit of detail, and Palantir, in my opinion, is a particularly bad choice, because if you look at the CEO, Alex Karp, some of the statements he's made are, in my opinion, very concerning. For example, the protesters at universities protesting the war in the Middle East, he's called them, or described them as unforgivable, and said perhaps they should be shipped to North Korea. So, that he's also pro-draft, and has said that he expects the US to fight a three-pronged war against Russia, China, and Iran. And what else has he said? And in a 2020 interview he gave, which was very interesting, he described a bit of his thinking behind what drives the company. And he was saying in an emergency situation, he would be, because of his background, the first person that everyone would come after. So, he openly accepts that paranoia is something that's driving his decisions in running the company. So that should be a bit concerning for everyone, in my opinion, that this company is getting so much information. And Peter Thiel, of course, is the founder. He recently gave an interview. I don't know if you saw it. It was just a few weeks ago, where he was asked, should humanity continue? And he eventually answered yes, but he stumbled over the answer for about, I'd say, a good 30 seconds before he eventually came forward with a yes. So, it's a bit concerning that this information is being analyzed by anyone at all. But I have particular concerns about Palantir having access to it, and coupled with what we were talking about earlier, central bank digital currencies and the potential for stable coins to effectively work the same, and all of this information gathering with these very detailed profiles being collected and created. It's very concerning what's happening, and people need to be aware of this and need to start taking action.
What actions would you recommend people start taking?
I'm like you in that I'm libertarian. I believe that people are self-sovereign. They should. Oh, well, I believe in small government. So, or the smallest government maybe. But I think people should take their own actions, and they can immediately get themselves a VPN if they don't have one already, virtual private network, and that will protect some of their data from the platforms that they're visiting on the internet. That's very important. In fact, BitChute has, because we believe in this so much, we've started bundling a VPN with our memberships. But if you don't get ours, at least get one. There's so many choices out there. If you're not already doing it, start using private end-to-end encrypted messaging. Don't use messaging that goes through third-party servers where they can read your messages, because the chances are that can fall into other hands. Also, you use for online use, use browsers that respect your privacy more than Google Chrome. So, for example, a good one is Brave browser. And if you're used to Google Chrome, which is by far the most popular browser on the market, going to Brave is no big difference, because it's based on the same code, but they've just stripped out a lot of the tracking that Google has put in there and added more privacy enhancing features. So that's very easy to do. These are all very simple things to do, and not very expensive at all. And another thing, so I mentioned I'm a fan of crypto, but I'm also a fan of cash. I think wherever possible, we should go back to using cash, and other physical things. Buy physical books, buy physical media as well when you can, because these are very important things that having that option and using it while we can, keeping it alive, is so very important, so that we're not completely trapped in this system. And tell other people. I think, even though the Snowden revelations happened so long ago and people sort of in the back of their mind know that they're being surveilled, I don't think most people really understand how bad it's got. So I think it's important to explain this to people, tell them what they need to do to at least start protecting their privacy. And I do think, even though I'm not a fan of government myself, I think it's also important, as we have these representatives, to try to contact them and put pressure on them to let them know that we're not happy with the way things are going, that these laws and these executive orders that are in place. And if enough of us do that, perhaps, then we can also use that as another way to slow it down. So I think that's a lot of things that people can start doing right now.
I definitely agree with you there. What is your favorite messaging, end-to-end encrypted messaging app?
So right now, I use Signal. I use a few. I use Signal mainly because that's easier to connect with more people. But I actually, if you say my favorite, I would say Matrix. It takes a little bit more to get set up on. Matrix is actually a protocol, but it doesn't require a telephone number to create a Matrix account. So that would be my preferred. But I also use Signal because I want to keep in contact with people who aren't so tech savvy. So those two, really.
I moved to New Hampshire as part of the Free State Project, which is a libertarian movement here, and Signal and Matrix are huge messaging apps here in New Hampshire. And also, people use cash a lot, they use crypto. I don't know if you've heard of the gold back. It's basically gold embedded into plastic. So we use those as currency here a lot too.
Oh, fantastic. Actually, I mentioned to you before the call that I'm based now in Thailand. It's very interesting because people out here have a very different opinion of gold. On every high street, there's a gold shop. So you can actually walk into any gold shop on any high street at any time, and you can exchange gold for fiat currency and vice versa at a very reasonable trading price. So kind of interesting that relic, which I'm a big fan of, has stayed around in Asia a bit more as well. But I'm really happy to hear that that's in New Hampshire. I think that's a great idea to do things like that whenever we can.
I think so too. Do you have any final thoughts you want to share?
No, but just thank you for having me on. And if anyone hasn't seen BitChute yet, please do check it out. Yeah, so it's just www.bitchute.com. If you want to find me there, it's just /Ray. And please come over, give it a try. And BitChute is privacy focused, so we just track the minimum amount of data that we need to run the platform, rather than YouTube and equivalents that track every single click. We don't do that.
What data do you track?
So there's things that we need to track in order to give you features. So you can figure it out from the features. So for example, when you like a video, we need to be able to associate that with a user, things like that. Or when you subscribe to someone, we need to have a record of who subscribed. But that's how we decide what we track. We design a feature around what a user would like to have, and then we need to build that so that information is necessary. But when we do things like what you've previously watched, people requested that, but we do the inverse of what YouTube normally does. So YouTube would have that on, and then you have to opt out. We do the inverse, so we have it off, and you have to opt in if you want it.
That actually sounds really great, that you're minimizing the amount of data that you're using from other people, because a lot of people are concerned about their privacy, and some people really want to have little to do with platforms that are driven by algorithms to feed them content.
I agree.
Ray, thank you so much for joining me on Anarcho Agenda. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
This concludes episode 140 of Anarcho Agenda. If you like this content, support me on Patreon at patreon.com/crblake86. That's patreon.com/crblake86. Also, make sure you rate and review this podcast wherever you listen to it. Thank you very much for listening. Catch you next episode. Worms.